Boy, I don't know where you want to even kick this off. I, we just hosted Dr. Gil Carvalho, which you and I were talking about offline, and I thought that was a fantastic conversation. I think we're going to have points
Yeah.
that we're in perfect agreement with him, and his viewpoint of the study that just dropped and all the data might have some points of differences, but generally speaking, as we were talking about offline, I think when quote unquote controversy kind of comes up in this type of a world, and especially on social media platforms like Twitter, it just seems like it's so easy to find all the things that we disagree about and magnify those when they might be a very small part of the picture when we're comparing it to things that we all do agree on and see eye to eye on. And again, you and I were talking about that offline. What is your viewpoint on that?
I think that that is exactly right. And, to mention again something that we were saying online, I think that social media the algorithm feeds and promotes an exaggerated version of our disagreements, while simultaneously minimizes or makes us forget how many times we agree and actually about the important stuff. When I was listening to the episode with Gil, I mean, I agree with 98% of everything he said, and I don't agree with 98% on what's to it with my brother. It's something that, I mean, the rate of agreement with things he was saying was very high. Only a couple of points perhaps we can touch on, where I could clearly distinguish. I didn't disagree, and I think that, I mean, it's undeniable that social media is a polarizing way of communication. I mean, it also builds these weird categories on things that are not related. So, for example, I mean, diet became politicized, vaccines became politicized, lots of climate change became politicized, and I don't see why it should follow that if you think anything about the temperature of the planet should tell me anything about your diet preference or even about which hand you use to vote. It's you left leaning, right wing. I mean, however, social media kind of convinced us that the person you're interacting with is not on your same side of every debate, not just this one. And I think that's that exaggerates, or that makes the exchange of ideas harder, because people already start with an antagonistic view of who you are, what you try to communicate, what your goals are. As I mentioned in one of the few threads I made, I mean, I am sure that Gil and every other clinician who has criticized the paper wants the same thing I want, which is helping patients. I mean, most doctors, the vast majority of doctors, just want that. I just want to know how to help more patients and help them better. And when people are after the same thing, I think it's sad that we believe we are so different. And I think that a better way of communication and of exchange of scientific ideas is podcasts. And I enjoyed listening to the episode with Gil. As I said, I agree with pretty much everything he said, except for a few things. And I also think that one of the characteristics that makes social media debates, less fruitful is that, for better or worse, they are super fast. And debates in academia are not that fast. Journals are, slow in taking letters that criticize a paper, slow in replying to those letters. And this has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. And social media is not like that. I mean, social media is something that, someone made a point and you can reply to that point within the same minute. But that's not how academia works today. I wish, sooner than later, academia has a faster and better way to exchange ideas and points of criticism about any paper. But yeah, I think, in a nutshell, I think that much of the controversy about the paper is actually not that big, and it's among people who agree among themselves more than what sometimes they realize. And it was inflamed by the speed discrepancy in the exchange of ideas that happen in professional scientific publishing and social media.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to dive into that with you today. And I couldn't agree more. I think that there are some points of differences, but by and large, it just seemed like there's a lot more agreements, and the points of contention that we have may not be as big of a deal as we might think. But that said, let's talk about the study itself. Let's talk about the paper that came out. You've been working on this for a long time, so can you give us an overview of kind of what happened and what came out in the journal in April of 2025?
Sure. I mean, the paper from April the 7th is actually the second paper with data from this cohort of lean mass hyperresponders, of lean people who are restricting carbohydrates and who don't have, the usual picture of risk factors that someone with high cholesterol usually presents. In the vast majority of cases, when you see high LDL, you also see insulin resistance, you also see high triglycerides, you frequently see high blood pressure, you frequently see other risk factors that are absent in this population. I will quote absent because one of the main points I want to make is that the main finding, if I want, because it's a non-necessary restriction, but if I could choose one main point about the results of this paper, is that the LMHR population in this study is highly heterogeneous. The plaque response had lots of variability. They don't behave as a single population. Some people have much more plaque progression than others. And therefore, it's perhaps better to conceive them and follow them as not as a single homogeneous population. So one of the main results in this paper is the heterogeneity in the plaque response among LMHRs. I mentioned this is the second paper because the first paper, which is worth bringing people's attention to, is the Miami matched control. A good part of the controversy around the plaque results in this second paper comes from people comparing these populations, the results or the plaque progression results in this population, with other populations in other studies. And one of the many things I agree with Gil and with others, and that he actually wrote in the paper, is that, of course, one of the main limitations of this paper is that there is no control group. I would love to have more control groups. I would love to have not only one, other thoughtfully designed control groups. It's not like, I'm sure all my co-authors would agree we would have liked to have a control group. For multiple reasons, there isn't one. Because you could say this is the first attempt, of seeing if it's actually worth to have more studies and to inform the design of those future studies. So, this is like a first step, and this is the beginning of the conversation, not the end of any conversation on how to study people with this phenotype. That said, aware of the limitation of not having a control group, the first paper was doing the best available or possible thing to get a control group, which was the Miami match controls. And here I would emphasize match controls because one of the things that makes comparisons challenging is that there are multiple ways to define and measure plaque progression. Some methods are semi-quantitative, some measures are quantitative, some methods are automated, some methods are not automated, and there are multiple clinically relevant different plaque metrics. there are advantages and disadvantages. So if you take the results from one study and compare it with another study that used different methods, perhaps different plaque metrics and different inclusion criteria, you're going to get very different things. Which is why the Miami Heart, I think it's the best comparison available, because it used the same method and it was matched per participant. This is not a match of populations. This is not a match of inclusion criteria. It's a match of every participant with their risk factor twin in the Miami Heart, which is much better than if you simply draw, hey, these inclusion criteria look like the ones here. Yeah, they're slightly different. But no, we're not matching inclusion criteria. We're matching participants with the risk factors, which is a much better comparison. Not as good as having an actual control, but better than the comparisons that were around. And the Miami Heart paper found that some plaque metrics, because we need to be clear about one thing, the plaque results in Miami Heart come from the semi-quantitative methods. They don't have some of the methods that are now available in this second paper. So part of the confusion comes that if you look at some plaque metrics, and this is something Gil mentioned as well, if you look at some plaque values, you may see one thing, and if you look at other plaque values, you may see a different story. With some values, you will see that most people are stable. With some values, you will see that more people are having plaque progression. With other plaque metrics, you will see a different story. However, let me just emphasize that the population itself has high variability. It's not only a variability of methods or inclusion criteria. The population itself has people with high cardiovascular risk and people with low cardiovascular risk, which is why the supplemental table 1, which is where we break down plaque progression and we make these comparisons, in the best of our capacities, because again, for all the reasons I already mentioned, when we compare how people in this cohort at different tiers of cardiovascular risk behave differently. Those who started with high cardiovascular risk, because some people started with high cardiovascular risk, had much more plaque progression than those who didn't, which comes back to the point on perhaps it's not a good idea to think of all LMHRs as a population that behaves uniformly.